Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're back, ready to explore another powerful idea.
And today, it's Pan-Africanism, a concept with such deep roots and ongoing importance.
Absolutely. And our mission, as always, is simple. We take your sources, we dig deep, pull out those key insights, basically give you that shortcut to getting really well informed.
Cutting through the noise.
Exactly. So the main source we're diving into today is an article from Power Africa. It's called Pan-Africanism, from Marcus Garvey to Kwame Nkrumah, The Dream That Refused to Die.
Yeah, very evocative title.
It really is. And that's what we'll do. Trace it back,
Yeah.
look at the key figures, the challenges it's faced, and really try to grasp its spirit and why it still matters so much today.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Well, the article itself kicks off with this incredibly powerful, almost defiant tone. It talks about Pan-Africanism being buried in silence.
Right. Hidden away.
Hidden beneath borders drawn in Berlin,
Yeah.
Flags soaked in imperial compromise, even textbooks that teaches everything but our unity. It paints a picture of active suppression.
Yeah, deliberate erasure almost.
But then, boom, it hits you with this. They failed to kill the dream because it was never theirs to end. It says Pan-Africanism isn't some dry theory on paper.
No, it's described as the pulse of a people too stubborn to die. That's a really fundamental point it's making right up front.
What does that suggest to you, that opening?
Well, it tells you immediately that this isn't just politics. It's deeper. It's identity. It's memory. Like an unkillable memory of wholeness, as the source phrases it. That whisper of the ancestors connecting people across continents. It's suggesting the resilience comes from something internal, something they couldn't just switch off.
Like a fire.
Exactly. The fire that flared in the eyes of Marcus Garvey and roared in the mind of Kwame Nkrumah. It's positioning it as this inherent, enduring force.
Okay, so let's talk about Marcus Garvey then. The article points to him as seeing this dream, first in this modern age, clear and loud as a trumpet.
A real visionary figure for the time.
Born in colonial Jamaica, a black man who just stood up and said, look, black people are not inferior, not scattered by accident, and not waiting to be saved.
That's a powerful counter-narrative.
And the source stresses, he did not ask permission to love Africa. He declared it. He gave people the black star's symbol, told them to look homeward, not in shame, but in triumphs.
Even the symbolism is about reclaiming dignity.
Right, and it mentions, okay, his ships never sailed as planned. Logistically, there were issues, but his vision, they crossed oceans.
The idea traveled even if the fleet didn't.
Yeah. The article says he gave people a map, but not just any map, a psychological, spiritual, militant map. What does that kind of map actually mean?
I think it signifies a multi-layered approach to liberation. Psychologically, it's about rebuilding self-worth, fighting that internalized oppression.
Okay.
Spiritually, it's reconnecting with heritage, with ancestral strength. And militantly, well, that's about organizing for collective power, for self-determination.
So a whole toolkit for empowerment.
Exactly, a complete reorientation. The source emphasizes how he made millions stand taller in Harlem, Jamaica, Lagos, reminding them they were never lost to their ancestors. That psychological shift was huge. It laid groundwork.
A really crucial foundation in the diaspora. But then how did that spark, that awakening, translate back to the continent itself? How did it take root in African soil?
Well, that's where the article brings in Kwame Nkrumah. It shows how Ghana's independence becomes the moment where this dream kind of lands.
Right, it becomes tangible.
Yes, it moves from just an idea, however powerful, to an actual state-building project. Ghana's independence is described as prophetic.
Prophetic, in what sense?
In the sense that Nkrumah immediately framed it not just as Ghana's victory, but as step one for the whole continent. His famous declaration, the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked to the total liberation of Africa.
That's an incredibly bold statement for a newly independent nation.
Yeah.
What drove that? Was it purely ideology or practical concerns too?
The source suggests it was definitely both. Ideologically, it was the Pan-African dream made manifest. But practically, Nkrumah understood very clearly, it seems, that one free nation was vulnerable.
Surrounded by colonial powers or influences.
Exactly. He saw that African freedom must be continental or it would be crushed. So Ghana wasn't just about Ghana, it was a beachhead.
A starting point.
A starting point for a much larger project. His efforts with the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, the article calls that his scaffold.
The African Union, the AU today.
That's seen as his unfulfilled legacy. It reminds us he faced huge opposition, mocked, isolated, overthrew him.
Yeah.
But even in exile, the source says he spoke like a man possessed by destiny. He wasn't just speaking for Ghana anymore. He was speaking for the continent, for the diaspora. The vision was massive.
So we have these two towering figures, Garvey and Nkrumah. But Pan-Africanism wasn't just them, right? The article really highlights the diversity of voices.
Oh, absolutely. That's critical. It wasn't monolithic. You had figures like Fela Kuti in Nigeria.
Right, the musician.
But so much more than just a musician. A cultural force. The article says he was riddling his songs with rebellion, directly challenging power, using music as a weapon for liberation.
And then across the Atlantic, in the Caribbean.
You had Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, the whole Rastafari movement. Their message, linking back to Haile Selassie, wasn't just political, it was deeply spiritual.
Selassie is a symbol of black sovereignty reclaimed.
Exactly. And the Rastas understood, as the source puts it, that spiritual liberation is a weapon. Their insight was profound. Until the African soul is decolonized, the African mind cannot be.
That really broadens the scope of the struggle, doesn't it? It's not just borders and governments.
Not at all. It's about the mind, the spirit, the culture, which connects to someone like Walter Rodney.
The Guyanese scholar.
Right. He provided the intellectual framework, showing that the underdevelopment of Africa was not a tragic accident, it was a design. He laid bare the systemic nature of exploitation.
So Rodney diagnoses the system. What about reclaiming history itself?
That's where Cheikh Anta Diop comes in. The article says he gave us back our chronology, his work arguing that Egypt was black and so are we.
That was hugely controversial, but foundational.
Absolutely foundational. It directly countered centuries of racist narratives by establishing this deep history of African civilization and intellect. It was about psychological decolonization through history.
And you can see the links. Diop reclaiming history, the Rastas focusing on spiritual liberation.
And then Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau, the revolutionary leader, adding another layer. Cultural resistance precedes armed struggle.
The culture comes first.
The idea that you have to win the battle for hearts and minds, reclaim cultural identity, before you can effectively wage a physical liberation struggle.
And someone who seemed to embody that.
Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. The article says he lived that truth, governing as if revolution were not a slogan but a sacrament. He tried to put all these interconnected ideas, cultural pride, self-reliance, anti-imperialism, into practice at the state level.
So you have this incredible constellation of thinkers, artists, leaders,
Yeah.
all pushing this Pan-African idea forward in different ways.
Exactly. Music, scholarship, spirituality, governance. It was multifaceted.
Yet the article is brutally honest. Despite all this brilliance, it says we are still here, fragmented, co-opted, distracted.
It doesn't shy away from the difficulties.
No, it states flatly. Our enemies are better funded, more organized, and always watching. Why does it argue that a united Africa would end their feast? What makes Pan-Africanism such a threat?
Because, as the source says, Pan-Africanism isn't just romanticism, it's the one threat they cannot manage.
Why unmanageable?
Think about what unity implies. A continent in control of its resources.
Okay, massive economic implications right there.
Huge. Speaking to itself across colonial languages, trading with itself, protecting its people, valuing its culture, and defending its dignity. That scenario fundamentally disrupts the existing global power structure, which has relied on a fragmented, exploitable Africa for centuries.
So unity is the nightmare scenario for external powers.
Precisely. And that's why the article argues they actively work against it. They fund tribalism, inflame borders, weaponize NGOs, and install puppets in power.
Undermining it from within and without.
And they try to dismiss it publicly, mock Pan-Africanism as naive, while behind the scenes they collaborate across continents to ensure its failure. It paints a picture of very deliberate obstruction.
It's a sobering assessment of the obstacles. But then the article pivots again. It doesn't end on that note.
No, it shifts towards hope, towards the present.
Yeah, it insists the dream still breathes. And it asks you to listen for it, to see it, in digital voices reconnecting diaspora to motherland.
The modern connections.
And in the resurgence of African philosophies, in that stubborn pride of black youth naming themselves in Swahili, Yoruba, and Twi, reclaiming identity.
It's pointing to signs of life everywhere.
It mentions dreadlock prophets still shouting on street corners, farmers who refuse GMOs, creators redefining what it means to be African. It's saying the dream isn't just history.
Right. It walks quietly in Mali, drums loudly in the Caribbean, and speaks many tongues in Europe and North America. It's present, maybe quieter sometimes, but definitely alive.
And this leads to a really critical question the source poses.
The challenge, really.
Yeah, will we be the generation that finally moves from slogans to systems?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Moving beyond talk to action.
What does that look like, according to the article? Building our own media, our own currencies, our own schools of thought.
By taking control of the narrative, the economy, the intellectual agenda, and crucially, to stop waiting for the colonizer to validate our dreams.
Yeah.
Self-reliance.
It frames Pan-Africanism not as some fuzzy nostalgia, but as necessity. Viewing the global black family as one body severed by time and trauma that needs mending.
The mending has to come from within that family.
Exactly. The article is emphatic. No foreign solution will save us. No borrowed flag, no IMF bailout, no Western institution can do what we must do for ourselves.
That's a powerful call for self-determination.
And it offers this vision of where salvation or progress will come from. Kinshasa, from Port of Spain, from Dakar, from Cape Coast, from Bahia, from the heart of the global black world itself.
Rising from within.
Yeah. The call is to embody Garvey and Nkrumah. Not just admire them, but act. By refusing to think small, refusing to be enemies of each other, and crucially, refusing to let colonial residue define our futures.
It's about actively shaping the future based on those principles. Living the dream now.
And so that really brings our deep dive today to a close. We've journeyed through this incredibly resilient idea of Pan-Africanism.
From its defiant roots with Garvey and Nkrumah.
Through all those diverse voices who shaped it.
Understanding the real opposition it faces.
And feeling that pulse of its resurgence today. It's quite a story.
It really is. And one thing that lingers from the source is this powerful assertion. Africa is not behind. It is rising. And its rising will shake the world if we let it. That's a forecast, a challenge, all in one.
It definitely leaves you thinking. And the article itself ends by turning the spotlight right back on us, on you listening.
That final question.
Yeah. Pan-Africanism is not dead. It is waiting. And now the question turns to us. Will we answer?
Something powerful to reflect on. We hope this exploration has given you plenty to think about and maybe sparked your own further digging.